Morning. There are several Lord of the Rings-like challenges when you come to these different sessions. The first is to get through registration. And once you are through registration, the whole world opens up for you. And part of that is this very exciting session today that Pasi Solberg from, well, perhaps you could introduce yourself.
Why don't you do that?
Yeah. Okay, you do it for me. Pasi Solberg, my longtime colleague and friend and world expert on Finland as a country and as an educational system, all that it stands for, and now visiting professor at Harvard University. So Pasi will be facilitating this session on the social side of teaching with me, and who am I?
You are my friend, Andy Hargreaves from Boston College, author and authority on educational change, and also teaching and teacher issues. The first time when I met Andy more than 20 years ago, it was after your book on teachers and teaching. So I consider you as an authority in these issues. Very nice to be with you here.
Yeah, and it's particularly nice for both of us to be with all of you. Pasi's going to say just a few housekeeping things, a bit more than housekeeping to begin with. I will introduce the speaker, and then we will frame really the discussion that we'll be having today. So, Pasi.
Okay, thank you. So the simple housekeeping things are the following, that we try to keep this morning interactive. So we invite you all to join us for conversation and dialogue and debate if you wish. There are several ways to do that. If you're comfortable with social media, if you want to tweet about your ideas or your questions, we have a hashtag over there. It's a Teaching and Learning Social Capital 15. So just use the hashtag and post your views or your questions. I try to read some of those things if you feel comfortable to do that. If you don't, there will be also time for you to stand up and ask any questions or your opinions on anything that you hear here. So we try to give you enough time after having a little conversation here with the panel after their presentations. So let's try to keep it dynamic conversation around this important issue. My role probably here is a little bit, if I put myself as a part of the panel here, to look at this topic from the international point of view. As Andy said, I come from Finland. I've been working in different countries around the world, and one of the questions I have in mind is that how do these things resonate internationally, globally? Can we talk about those things as we speak about them here in the United States? So I try to keep that dimension here with us.
So thank you, Pasi. We're like a beginner Academy Award presentation team, and receiving, presenting, and exemplifying these awards today will be our extremely distinguished panel. This session has been conceived and convened by the Albert Shanker Institute, which is established in the honor and legacy of Albert Shanker, a great teacher leader, professional leader, union leader, and oddly, not everyone knows this, one of the first two inventors of the idea of charter schools. And when Shanker created the idea, or co-created it, or simultaneously created it, what he had in mind was not schools that would compete against each other or against the public system in win-lose relationships, but actually schools which would foster innovation and professionalism that would then be shared with other schools within and beyond the community. So the idea of the social side of teaching is really embodied in his first ideas and in the contributions that he made. And this is part of what the Shanker Institute now does and why it's convened this session with three people here today who will be with us from right to left, as I look at it, left to right. No.
Yeah, you got it.
Yeah. We're talking geographically, not politically anyway, so it doesn't really matter. But Susan Moore Johnson from Harvard University, who has many credits to her name and reputation, including having taught and been a school administrator. I've known Susan's and used Susan's work over many years now. She has written some of the definitive work on the nature of teachers' work, on the school, well, really one of the first studies of the school superintendency, a key study on the next generation of teachers, how people learn to teach and stay in teaching, an upcoming book on the coherence of high-performing school systems, and interesting evaluations of Teach for America, which do not always say exactly what you might predict, because Susan's work is evidence-driven as well as values-driven. Second is John Pape, assistant professor from Brown University, just down the road. There's a very sort of New England thing about some of this team here tonight. John is an economist who specializes in thinking about the economics of teaching. And so we'll hear a lot about John from human capital, teachers' careers, teacher experience, teacher development, what the returns to teaching are. We'll hear a lot about teacher quality and what a really thoughtful economist, because there are some, what a really thoughtful economist thinks about those things. And third is somebody I had the pleasure to meet for the first time several years ago through work with the Annenberg Foundation in Metro Nashville, Tennessee, and that is Carrie Liana, who's really done in the wider organizational sector outside teaching as well as within teaching, the key studies on social capital in organizations and how that improves performance and effectiveness over time. Carrie's work within our field is on the social capital of teaching. It's really the kind of some of the leading work in the field. She is a business professor from the University of Pittsburgh, and we're looking forward to hearing from Carrie as well. As we approach the discussion today, we'd ask you to think about the interconnection, as the panel will be doing, of three different things. Very recently, Michael Fullen and I wrote a book called Professional Capital. It's pretty much a new concept, but containing some fairly well-established ideas. And the essential idea behind professional capital is if you want to get a return, you have to make an investment. And so in teaching, if you want a return from teaching and quality in teaching, then it's important to invest in the training of teachers, in the development of teachers, and in the mentoring and coaching of teachers, and in how ideas circulate, just like capital, or move around amongst the teaching profession. And there are three components of professional capital, and the panel in a way will address different parts of these, but we would ask you also to think about, we have a slide later on to help you think about which of these are most interesting or important for you. One is human capital, and human capital is where much of the policy and administrative emphasis is now, and that's how do we find and train the best people. Individually, what are their skills, their knowledge, their expertise, their competence, their educational level? How do you attract very high quality individuals into the profession and remove very low quality individuals from the profession. That's the human capital argument. The social capital argument is how do we raise quality by what we do together, by how we collaborate, by how we work together, by the levels of trust that we establish as a community. So what do we know about the different ways of building social capital and about the impact that this has on performance? And this, in a way, is where the Shankar Institute leads, which is on this area of social capital. And a third, which we take from the field of law and decisional law, we call decisional capital. And that is really how you develop your expertise and your judgment over time through experience of doing the same things repeatedly until they become effortless, and through challenge and stretching by, once you've mastered some things, stretching and moving yourself into other areas throughout the teaching career. So human capital, individuals; social capital, how we are together; decisional capital, how we build and develop this over time. And perhaps, Pasi, you can remind people of the three questions, and then we will move to the panel.
Sure, yeah. I would actually like to ask you to take just half a minute of this time and think about one question that led you into this room this morning, and share that thought with somebody who's sitting close to you so that we can have the social side of this panel discussion as well. Just a half a minute. What is your question? What are you thinking about within this topic this morning? Okay, half a minute. Do you want to take this first slide? Do you need this one?
Yeah. So this is, we'll say, while they're talking, this is what you should be thinking about. So as you hear all these presentations, where would you invest?
Okay.
So you could do that.
I'm going to take this. You do that one. I'll take questions.
Okay, you're going to do this first?
No, I'm going to take.
No, but you're going to do that first,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
then I'm
yeah.
going to do this. Yeah.
Okay. Good. Who would like to speak before we begin? Just 2 or 3 ideas that you have here in this room. Okay.
I saw the name Al Shankar, and I knew he was a leader in labor, and I was interested in learning about employee labor relations in the school place. I'm a union rep, one of 3 union reps into my building, and we actually have a grievance filed right now. So I was just looking to see if we, I could learn any more information about employee labor relations in the workplace, in public school.
Thank you. Second one. Anybody here? Thank you.
I work for a nonprofit that supports beginning math and science teachers and to become teachers and teacher leaders. And so I am interested in how you measure teacher social capital.
One more, and then we move on. Oh, it's back. Okay. What did you think?
Well, we were also talking about just how to create this in our district to provide, sort of a framework or foundation in order for these 3 things to be happening.
Wonderful. Andy.
Wonderful, that's great. So now we're going to hear from the 3 members of this august team this morning. And they'll have about 5 minutes each. And as you're listening to them as an advanced organizer, what do you think about this question? So this is a question for you as well as for the panel. In whatever area you're in a non-profit, you're in a union, you're in a school district, you're in a charter school chain, whatever area you're in, if you had to invest the money of your organization to produce positive changes in teacher quality, which of the 3 areas, if you had to choose one or the other, which of the 3 would you lead with? Would you lead with human capital? Would you lead with social capital? Or would you lead with decisional capital, developing the teacher's career over time? Which would you choose and why? So if you've been thinking about that while you're listening to these great presenters, we'll come back to that and open for discussion afterwards. Susan.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. You have to know we can't see you. We see your outlines, but the lights are very bright, so forgive us if we're not looking in your eyes. This question has been reworded since I first heard it, and it was, where would you put your money? And I always took that in a sort of metaphorical sense rather than where would I invest my dollars. But I see this as a question of where do you put your resources, and the money piece is one part of it, another is time, another is energy, priorities, all of those things. And so in the spirit of there is no silver bullet, which certainly, Andy, you have written at some point some version of that, I would say I won't choose one. But I will focus on the human capital, social capital interaction. And I think that the relationship of those to each other is really what matters to me. Let me see if I can get myself to the, okay. So the Ed Crate schools, that I know some of you have heard that more than you'd like, but some of you may never have heard it. Sociologist Dan Lordy and historian David Tyack use this metaphor to characterize the organizational structure of schools. It's also a bit the physical structure of classrooms across, on either side of a corridor. Tyack explains that that's the result of moving from a one-room schoolhouse to an age-graded school over time by assembling instructional units of classrooms and then grade levels and then schools, assembling both the units, physical units, and the teachers in them. And so one teacher and one group of students are assigned to a classroom. And this, Lordy argued, and I would certainly agree, explains the isolation of teachers in their work. And that isolation, I would argue, has tremendous consequences, negative consequences for most students, especially in high-needs schools. So these are each supposed to be a teacher. And then the reality is that within any school, and the economists have made this very clear, there's tremendous variation from teacher to teacher as measured by student performance on standardized tests. So you have, at any time, teachers that these grades are sort of proxies for value-add scores. Some version of this one's better than that. And you have this variety that is in part about the performance at any moment, but also is about the variation in knowledge, in experience, expertise, commitment, grit, niceness, all of those kinds of things. And so if reformers focus solely on improving human capital in the way that Andy was describing, basically, measuring teachers' value based on their students' scores or simply observing individuals and rating them, then students are going to receive the luck of the draw in student assignment. You'll have different people who are of different quality, and some students will do better than others, typically the children of parents who are pushy, like I am. So some will get the A+ teachers, others get the C+ teachers. But because students move through school from class to class and grade to grade over time, something that some schools really pay no attention to, then efforts to improve teachers' performance school-wide reduce that variation, increase the integration of what they do, would benefit students. And as would efforts among teachers to coordinate their instruction, monitor students across classrooms and grades. So therefore, I would say that our goal ought to be to develop a collective from what otherwise is a collection of teachers to promote peer learning, professional growth, and coordination of teachers' work. This will not happen efficiently or effectively if we concentrate our resources, that is our money and all the other things, primarily on developing individuals one at a time or dismissing them one at a time, sometimes swapping out low-scoring teachers for high-scoring teachers. And I'm obviously simplifying what's going on, but if you're in education, you know what I mean. I would argue that the instructional capacity of schools is best developed by organizational changes in how teachers and administrators do their work, in processes such as supervision, peer observation, collaboration of teachers on teams. So this idea of social capital has been around for quite a while. I particularly like James Coleman's version of it, in that he explained that human capital is transformed for the benefit of the organization, for all those kids and all those classes, by social capital, which is about the relations among the persons. So whatever human capital a school acquires or has to subsequently be developed by the social capital within schools. And when that doesn't happen, development stagnates, performance lags. In schools, the social capital that transforms human capital is enacted by principals and teachers as they participate in teams, faculty meetings, professional development, coaching, evaluation, or lunchroom conversations, which are probably the most important thing that happens in a school. So I wanted to this is what we're after. I wanted to just tell you about this study very, very briefly. A lot of our work at the Project on the Next Generation of Teachers comes back to the reality that from the teacher's perspective, if it doesn't happen in their school, it doesn't happen. So that trying to understand variation across schools and what's going on has been really important. So our current study is about 6 elementary and middle schools. They include traditional schools, turnaround schools, and charter schools located in one large city. All of these schools had achieved the highest rating in the state's accountability system. The state is Massachusetts, and its accountability system is based on the MCAS, which is a fairly demanding test. The schools in this study, although they're in the same geographical space, are under different policies, and I don't have time, I'm not allowed to explain all those, but they're very interesting in that they give a lot of autonomy to individual schools, but there's some variation there. So we conducted interviews with 99 teachers. If I'd ever had the count, we would have had one more if I'd realized it. 17 administrators, 7 teaching interns who were full-time in these schools, and 19 non-teaching staff things like deans of discipline and people who had interaction with kids. Overall, the question that we were asking was, how do these schools hire, assign, pay, and develop their teachers? So it's human capital from the school site, and how do principals and teachers assess these practices? So 2 practices I wanted to focus on. One is human capital, primarily a human capital process of hiring teachers. What was most remarkable in all these schools is how much they put into hiring teachers, how much effort, resources of all sorts. And although several of them the teachers were at-will employees in the school and they could be asked to leave by the end of the day, that virtually never happened. And in fact, there was tremendous retention in these schools. So the focus was not on dismissing them, which is kind of contrary to a lot of people's expectations about these schools. So what these schools did, and this is a broad generalization, but this is where most of the evidence was, invested substantial time and resources in recruitment and hiring. They searched primarily for teachers who were what they called mission aligned, which really meant caring about the kids and believing that you could make a difference and not blaming the children for whatever deficits, real or imagined, they came, and demonstrating positive attitudes, beliefs, and skills. Attitudes such as, I'll stay till the work is over. Very, very serious commitment to what the school was doing. The process included multiple phone and in-person interviews. The resume and reference checks were done very carefully. This is all in contrast to the way we know from research most teachers are hired on the basis of one interview with a principal in August. And then across these schools, teachers were asked to do demonstration lessons. Some of them were in the schools where they hoped to be hired. Some principals preferred to see them in their own school so they could see the relationship with students. And what was really interesting was, I do have it, a lesson debrief after these demonstration lessons with administrators and teachers. And what the candidates didn't really understand at the time was that was the place where the decision was often made, because it signaled to people whether people were ready to learn and grow, as opposed to just listening to feedback. Now, there are social capital elements of this process, no doubt about it, but it was essentially a human capital practice. However, they also invested a great deal in what happened to these teachers after they were hired. They didn't, for the most part, have the kind of induction with a single mentor, because the teachers, once they were hired, were immediately embedded in very intensive interactive work with their peers. And this is one piece of a much more complicated set of options. Grade level teams of teachers, they met at least twice weekly to plan curriculum and to monitor students' progress with interim assessments and content tests and all kinds of things. They had time built into their schedules. In a couple of the schools, they had 2 half days a week where they were doing professional development, for which this was a piece. These teachers relied on their teams for curriculum development, and they had, in 2 schools, interdependent lesson planning. So if we were all the 6th grade group, I would do the writing lesson, Andy would be responsible for the math lesson, John would do, another lesson, and then we would all be teaching those lessons. It wouldn't be the 6th grade, it would be the 3rd grade, where it was, one class. So very interdependent kinds of activities. You couldn't get away from this, this social capital piece. The teams in several schools were facilitated and trained and supervised by teacher leaders. They were facilitated by trained and supervised teacher leaders. Another very big investment a couple of the schools made. And the team members participated in frequent peer observations. And because they often all taught at the same time as other team members, they used video review of lessons when they couldn't visit each other. So therefore, my answer is social capital and human capital in different proportions for different parts, both essential. Thank you.
Thanks, all. Thanks for having me here. I'm going to give sort of a very similar answer to that, but I'm going to start by telling you sort of, if I had to pick, if I put my cards on the table, I'm going to start by saying that human capital is central to the success of schools. So if I have to pick one of these 3, and I don't want to have to pick, but if I did, I'd put my money on human capital. In other words, I'd rather have a school that had a whole bunch of excellent teachers working relatively in isolation than a school that had a whole bunch of low-performing teachers who worked together very well. So that's where sort of the place where I'm coming from. I think there's a lot of really strong evidence that we all know that teachers matter a great deal, right? We've heard of these studies about the $250,000 kindergarten teacher. All this work, I think it's been a lot of really strong work out there, that the individual teacher matters an awful lot. And so I think this is real evidence that the human capital is central here. There's also growing evidence, and Susan started talking about some of this, about how important the school leader is in coordinating teachers, and the human capital of the school leader is still human capital. So this is broader than just the individual teacher. This is about the human capital of all folks in the school. But I think this is in many ways a false choice, right? Between trying to choose between these different things, they're much more interdependent. They're much more interrelated than the choice that we have to make is. And I think that often the policy discussion and the research discussion comes down to. So I think policymakers. And I'll use the example here of teacher quality, right? We heard about teacher quality. There's a lot of buzz about teacher quality. I think that policymakers and researchers often think about teacher quality in a very narrow way, in a way that's in my view, too narrow. I think we think about it as a characteristic of the teacher itself. So we tend to, when we think about teacher quality, I think our mind goes to human capital. This is only about human capital, the characteristics of the individual teacher. As a result, we think of it being portable. You move from one school to the next, you carry your quality with you, and that stays the same from school to school. And I also think we tend to see it as fixed, right? You are a quality teacher or not a quality teacher. This is about you, a characteristic of you that stays the same. And I think that none of this is, in my view, is true. And so I want to make 3 points here about this. First, I think that teacher effectiveness or teacher quality is a lot broader than human capital. So even though I put my money on human capital, I think we need to acknowledge this is a lot bigger than the teacher effectiveness is a lot bigger than just human capital. And so here's a sort of a brief framework for thinking about the effectiveness or the quality of a teacher. And clearly, the sort of blue circle is the stuff that's about the teacher themselves. That's the human capital piece. But I think that context, things that are going on in the school, the effectiveness of the school leader, how the school leader organizes the school, that's all stuff that can contribute to teacher effectiveness that's not necessarily about the human capital of that teacher. And I think that the match between those two is also really important. And I think social capital is a really important part of that context, but I'd also make the point that there's much more to context, much more to the professional environment in schools than just the interrelationships between teachers and between teachers and school leaders. So I think this implies 2 things. One, your quality as a teacher might change as you move from school to school. Your quality as a teacher is not necessarily just a characteristic of you, but it's a characteristic of you and your environment. The second point I want to make about this is we hear time and again that teacher quality is fixed, right? You are a quality teacher or not a quality teacher. And we hear in the policy world that teachers stop improving after whatever you want, what number you want, 3, 4, 5 years, and teachers don't get any better after that. And Matt Kraft and I, who's a colleague of mine at Brown, have a paper that really calls this into question. And we show that teachers, this is how teachers improve over the course of their career. And we show that even later in the career, from years 10 to 30 there, teachers improve substantially. Obviously, I was a classroom teacher. I got a lot better from my first to my second year, right? You learn a whole lot there. The slope is steeper early in the career. But I think that we find some good evidence that there is continued returns to experience afterwards. Teachers are continuing to develop their human capital, continuing to improve their quality. So this is not fixed. Teacher quality is not fixed. And the third point that I want to make is that the school context, and specifically social capital, can really be a key contributor in improving the human capital in a school. And so in many ways, I see social capital as a core strategy for developing the human capital in the school. And I'll make 3 points about this from some of the work that I've done. The first comes from a study that Susan and I did also with Matt Kraft, suggesting that teachers leave schools where they're not supported. Teachers leave schools where they don't have good colleagues, where they don't respect and value their colleagues. In many ways, we could think about this as evidence that low social capital in a school can lead to a reduction in the human capital of the school. Teachers are leaving. They're taking their human capital with them if the social capital isn't in place. Second, teachers improve more in schools where they have supportive professional environments. And this, here's another picture that shows these returns to experience. This is those early, or at least returns to experience early in a teacher's career. And what I have here, this is again from a study that Matt Kraft and I did, is it breaks down these returns to experience based on the professional environment of the school, whether teachers are in a supportive environment or not a supportive environment. And what you see is that by year 10, teachers at the green line on top are teachers who are in supportive environments. They've improved their skills, they've improved their quality more than teachers who are in less supportive environments. And so this is really about the interaction of the professional environment, of the context, maybe the social capital in that school, and how teachers are developing their human capital, how teachers are improving. And the third point I want to make is from a study that I'm doing now in Tennessee, where we're looking at how we can use teacher evaluation to improve student performance. So the data, the feedback that teachers get from teacher evaluation. And what we do is we pair up teachers in a school, teachers who are low performing in specific areas of practice, We match them with teachers in the same school who have demonstrated a history of success on those specific areas. So this is a story about peer learning, really about social capital. We're putting these teachers together, partnering them up, and having them work together over the course of the year. And what we're finding is that this can really build teacher effectiveness. Again, it can build the human capital of teachers. And we're seeing positive effects on observation scores, so teaching practice is changing, and student achievement. Math and reading scores are improving. And also, I think, interestingly, for the policy discussion out there about evaluation, teachers who are involved in this program, or the schools that got this program, their teachers feel more positively about evaluation as a potential for leading to teacher improvement. So to wrap up, for improvement at scale, I think we need to focus on developing human capital. So I think the name of the game is developing the human capital, developing and improving this teacher quality. I also think that we need to think more carefully about, this is what Susan's point here, how we coordinate the deployment of human capital throughout the school. That's what that's where I come down, and we'll hear what Carrie has to say. Thanks very much.
Well, this is great because we're going to disagree a little bit. I'm Carrie Leanna, and as Andy said, I am a professor in the business school, in the School of Medicine, and the School of Public Policy at the University of Pittsburgh. So back to the question, if you had to put your money somewhere, where would you put it? And my answer would be I would invest in social capital. And the reason for that is because we believe that the research evidence suggests that social capital has the largest impact on student achievement. I want to go back a little bit to this issue of what is capital, that this idea of capital in schools is borrowed from economics and business. And the capital part of this is really kind of for something to be capital, it has to have value in some ways. So human capital is this resources embedded in the individual is the way we usually think about it. I think John makes some excellent points about that isn't unchanging and that isn't necessarily entirely portable. But we typically think about this as being created through education and experience. Social capital, resources embedded in relationships, things like sharing information and trust and sharing the same language and having the same goals. Some of the things that Susan was talking about with the schools that she looked at. And this is really created through interactions and having some sense of shared experience. There's all kinds of other forms of capital like money and facility and technology and those kinds of things that we're not really talking about here today. Another way to think about this, and I'm just kind of putting this up here just for the purposes of our discussion, that if we think about explanations for success or failure in public schools, that you have these structural explanations, things like poverty, but you also have these process explanations and really kind of answering this question of, why are some teachers better than others and why are some schools better than others? That human capital would say some teachers are better and some schools are better because of the people that are there, because we have people that are experienced and have the right credentials and the right training and professional development, et cetera. And that this is kind of these skill bundles is at the school level what makes them better. Social capital would say that some teachers are better than others because of the connections that they have to others, and that's where they get their information, their knowledge, their motivation, et cetera. And the same at the school level. Some schools are better than others because of these common goals that facilitate coordination and action and positive risk-taking, et cetera. We do large-scale research studies, and again, we do them in a lot of different industries. I happen to get captivated by schools, and so I ended up doing about 10 years of research in schools. And the reason that we approach these studies the way we do, instead of doing kind of smaller case studies, is it occurred to me early on, and you are in the field, maybe probably know better than I do, but it seemed to me in looking at the literature and looking at schools that we know how to make a good school. We know what that takes. But it strikes me that the fundamental problem in education is one of scale. How do we make all schools better? So it's not just cherry pick the, quote, best teachers that all get along and work well together and the best kids and the motivated parents, et cetera. But how do we do that for lots of different schools? And what that means is some people are going to be average. So how do you make the school better when you have average or even below average students, average or below average principals, average or below average teachers? So what that led us to is, a huge study, and the one I'll talk about today, but we've done several of these, where we had, tens of thousands of kids and thousands of teachers and hundreds of schools. And we really looked at different measures of human and social capital. I think John is right that we tend to look at human capital very narrowly. We also wanted to focus on measurable outcomes for students and teachers, things like turnover for teachers and things like student achievement with students. And here's the punchline on at least one of these studies. And that is to say that students benefit when teachers are high in both human capital, that is to say their skills and their abilities and their experience, and strong social capital. That if you look at the ties, in this case, we also have ties with people outside of the school and with principals, et cetera, but looking just at ties with teachers or among teachers within the school, that you can see that they do better, and you can see the slope of that line is greater with high ability teachers than it is with their lower ability counterparts. But the effects of social capital, and this is why I put my money on social capital, but the effects of social capital are over twice as strong. That if we look at one standard deviation or above the average in teacher ability, and I can talk about how we measure teacher ability, but I think we did it reasonably well, that results in a 2.2% rise in student achievement gains over the course of a year, but social capital benefits students far more. A one standard deviation, again, just above the average, 5.7% rise in student achievement gains. So you see the results are 2.5 times greater. So I would put my money in social capital. Last word is and we can talk more about this because we want to hear from you, that human capital is an answer to improving the quality of public schools, but I think reform efforts that are focused here will fail. Social capital is even more important, and this requires something of a cultural shift, I would say, in terms of the way we direct policy, the way we manage schools, and also the way principals interact with teachers. We've done other work that shows that micromanagement of teachers through being, quote, instructional leaders is a very poor way to get success in schools. So we can talk about all those things, and I'll just stop there.
Well, thank you, all the panel. That was absolutely gripping, and really was gripping. And sorry, I use these kind of very British ways of talking sometimes. And so, if you remember this question, to ask you to think about as the panel was talking, the question was.
Next slide.
This one. So first, we're just going to warm up slightly by which of course, everybody wants to say, well, they're all important. But if you had to lead with one, just first of all, reflect for a few moments. If you had to lead with one, knowing the others are relevant, which would you lead with? And I'm going to ask you to raise your hands in a second. So if you're going to lead with human capital, I'm going to ask you to stick one finger in the air. Actually, one hand.
Yeah, we can't see.
One hand. If you're going to say social capital, I'm going to ask you to raise two. And if you're going to lead with decisional capital, which is really concentrating on the development of those, of the career through years of experience and forms of support, you don't have a third hand. Well, some of you may, but we'll ask you to put your hands on your head, okay? Please do not choose on the basis of how many hands you can physically raise, but on what's relevant. So I'm going to ask you in a second, and then I'm going to ask you to keep your hands up because we'll ask you to do something following that. So, first of all, if you believe it is, you should lead with human capital, could you raise one hand in the air? And please keep it there, okay? If social capital, could you raise two hands in the air? Wow, keep them there. If it's decisional capital, hands on heads. All right, now, would you look around you and find one person who's got a different number of hands in the air than you? And for the next 3 minutes, would you discuss between you why you would lead with different things? Okay? So next 3 minutes, somebody different than you.
We should have had somebody on the panel with decisional capital.
We've got...
You can define it.
Yeah, I know, I never understood the distinction, actually. Yeah.
interaction slide. I mean, that's where
The what?
Yeah, so
Oh,
I think
yeah,
that's where we want to agree.
so we got
Yeah.
more time.
I mean,
well, you know what's interesting?
But no, we should treat the time seriously.
Low ability teachers is.
So do you want to take these comments
But
back and then...
it's the
Okay,
density.
and then facilitate a
Say
bit
if-
of, so get some
if
responses,
teachers
then
that are
perhaps
lower
ask one or two
ability,
people on the
they
panel to
benefit
respond.
when everybody's talking to everybody else. That they do. High ability teachers, they
okay,
benefit more
good,
from strong
good.
sides. So if
All
they
right,
have
so
one or
we'll
two
take these
people
next.
that they-
I'll call them back
they're
toward
talking
you.
to.
You
So
move
it's kind
around.
of different depending
Okay,
on the teacher.
is that
I mean,
yours?
the way you said it, it has to be tailored.
I have one exactly like that.
Individual. I have a question here,
Just
though,
has better
on-
ideas, if
on
that's
this. Is this a sort of effect? Because
Oh, well,
don't
that's
teachers
got
get
full of it in that
kind of
case.
moved as you get more experience, you also get to go to the school you want to go to?
to move to the school you want to go to?
Yeah, because that everybody
Yeah.
wants to go to the
Yeah.
good schools.
I think the good thing is
That's potentially
get a bit
true,
of
but
momentum.
we-
So
even
if
if
you
we
can get a bit of
control what
momentum
we-
going
what
first,
school picks effects.
I'll let the panel know that.
Did
Let's
you
give
do
them
like
another
their
minute.
experience within the school or just in the district? Within the school?
No, this is their experience over time.
Okay.
In teaching.
Yes.
So we're going to try and get a bit of momentum going amongst the crowd here, and then we'll ask for a little bit of back and forth. We've got just under 25 minutes, so a bit of back and forth with you, and then at the end, we'll literally like 2 sentences for each of you to just stay where you are for each of you to close with and to have the last word. Okay?
Okay.
So that's the plan.
Okay.
All right. Give them another 30
So,
seconds.
but it could be
Then
that,
let's take it
well, I'm asking, I don't know if this is right, but it just occurred to me that it could be that,
And then we'll
as
ask for
people
a
get
bit
to
of
bid into the
depending on which way they go.
they get in, in other words, everybody wants to go to a school that has a supportive environment, has better kids.
That's right.
That's so I just didn't know whether that was part of it.
I think that it could be, but I mean, even if we compare teachers in the same school, we're using the variation
Oh,
over
really?
time, and we're finding the same.
So they're.
We find similar
I mean,
results.
it's really interesting. Yeah.
So this would
it's
be good.
really
You know, she
interesting
said
and
this,
really
I said
kind of
that.
belies
Why?
this idea.
So another minute, I think. Another minute.
Tenor being a problem.
1 minute. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Now what? I mean, it was. There's lots of. The issue is we don't measure in the professional environment. It's, what we're using the TEL. I don't know if you know the TEL survey.
Yeah.
Teachers
Yeah.
and learners and leaders
Yeah.
or whatever it is survey.
I
And
know.
so it has.
I'd love to add some questions to that.
It has real advantages and lots of
Yeah.
coverage, but it has
Yeah.
some limitations too. So.
Yeah.
Is the New Massachusetts data out on that one? Do you
I don't know.
I was just thinking about
Okay,
it.
thank
Look
you.
Back at my schools.
Thank you. All right, Pazzi is going to move around amongst you now to try and get a little feel of the sorts of issues you were discussing between you. Pazzi.
Okay, let's go. I'm a teacher now, so I'm not going to ask you whether you want to talk or you don't want to talk. You have to talk right now. Okay, tell us what did you talk about?
Well, we all decided that we missed decision capital, so we decisional capital. So we moved away from that. But these two ladies felt social capital was more important. I felt the human capital was more important. I think, and jump in, I think that we all said that for different reasons, they're both important, but it really does start with that school leader to kind of set the tone. You know, what's the point in teachers being collaborative and working together if they're not supported, you know, by the school leader? And I think you had a very good question about also how they determine the effectiveness of the social capital schools. I don't know if you wanted to touch on that when you said the measurement. Yeah.
Yeah, we were just talking about with the social capital piece, how do you, it seems like the intangible measurements of like quality of life. I've taught in a good school and I've taught in a poorer school, and I mean that in a leadership perspective. I've had a good leader and I've had a bad leader, and it totally changed the environment in which we were working. But I don't know how do you measure kind of that touchy-feely, like it felt good teaching in that school versus, you know, you were kind of scared of the principal and not sure what type of personality you were going to get from day to day.
Yeah, I wanted to add it.
Hello. Oh, I just wanted to add that I didn't like the idea of choosing between the two of like human capital and social capital, because I think, you know, we need, you know, why can't we focus on all these areas all at once? Because it's good for teachers to do like professional development and things like that, but then if I'm not able to collaborate with other teachers at my school, you know, it's like, really, what's the point? So.
Thank you so much. Let's take another one. Teacher is coming. Better height. Somebody here.
Down here.
Sure.
Our discussion was pretty much based on, social capital versus decisional capital. And we kind of went back to our slogan at our schools, whereas teamwork makes the dream work. The mere fact that when you're having conversations, just like, you know, we were talking now, synergism itself, you know, she said something, I didn't think of it from that point of view. So it's kind of like the sharing of minds and things. We both pretty much eliminated human capital because at some point you reach a ceiling, you know, whereas, you know, you may not be able to move forward without, you know, the assistance of your team. And in our county, in Prince George's County, we have somewhat of a train-the-trainer model, whereas, you know, we develop professional learning communities where you go and get trained. Then you come back, you develop professional learning communities inside of your building and things like that. But I can also see the other aspect of decisional capital because we're in a generation of, you know, I want success now. We'll start something and then, you know, thinking about over time, if you gave it time, it might actually work. But I don't know. I guess we're in a generation whereas, this seems like, you know, a good idea. Let's jump on a bandwagon, and everything changes. And then, you know what, sometimes it might take 5 to 10 years for you to actually see that growth. So it was between social and decisional capital.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'll take one more, and I'll move to this section. You'll have a chance to pose questions or opinions after this. Sir.
Oh, I didn't raise. Oh, I was just going like this. Sorry. I'll say that's okay. Well, I just thought I was for social, but I also thought that with human capital, I mean, I think sometimes we don't give educators enough credit just coming in, and I saw the graph. I think we all agree on the first couple of years are always the toughest, but I think with social, I just think it's the foundation of everything. It's just toxic if the social thing's not there. And actually, anyway, it's a good discussion. Do you want to? We were ganging up on her.
Well, I'm teaching Illinois, which has the lowest credit rating in the nation right now, so I was just voting for capital, period. That was the choice.
Like actual capital, yeah.
So, but I went with human capital. I'm in a district where they called me in the day before school started and gave me a job, you know, after saying, can you write your name? And so, but there are districts around us that do that process where they tape teachers and really do the reflection piece, which is so valuable. But I've taught a long, long time, 28 years. So I've had bad principals, I've had good principals. Now we have principals who are supposed to be teacher leaders. And they're saying, how can I be a teacher leader when I'm also trying to order enough toilet paper for the year? I mean, a principal's job is just impossible right now. I would never want to be one. But if you've got those good teachers and teachers that are willing to share, and so it's sort of the social capital, but still it's also one of those dispositions. If we're willing to jump in and help people without that official instructional leader title, because there's not going to be any money for it, you know, it's a good thing. But, you know, there's also a negative payoff for really strong teachers. And I bet there's other people in this room that will tell you about it too. What happens is that you wind up with the biggest classes in the world because parents want you to teach their kids. And so when I'm teaching an AP class with 40 kids in it, it's like, maybe next year I shouldn't be a highly effective teacher because I'm killing myself, so.
Thank you so much. Wonderful ideas. We're going to take more comments from you, but anybody in the panel, if you want to react to something you heard, but be brief, please, because there's a lot of more coming. Carrie.
Are these mics on?
Yeah.
I wanted to just say, several people ask about measuring social capital, and is it this like kind of touchy-feely thing? And the way we measure it is we use social network analysis, and what we ask people is a couple of things. Who do you talk to? How frequently? And how much do you trust them? And we ask them, what do you talk about? So we calculate different scores for people you talk to about math versus people you talk to about literacy. So we actually don't use, we've done some studies where we did these general culture measures, but we did actually kind of social networks because we wanted to know who do you talk to, how frequently do you do it, and so those are there. I also wanted to make one other point, and this was to an earlier a question about labor relations. It seems to me one of the benefits of social capital is it's something that both teachers, employees, labor, and also management can all get behind. So it seems to me it's kind of a politically, so to speak, a winner as well.
Andy.
Great. Could I, Susan, could I just, I mean, come in with what you want to, but there were some, there are a lot of questions here about leadership. You know, yeah, so you'll get this good social capital if you've got a good leader, and you'll not get it if you've got a bad leader. What have you, through this study and others, what have you learned about whether you get high social capital amongst the teachers if you've got high human capital amongst the leaders? So that you're kind of lucky that they're very skilled leaders. Or do very skilled leaders also exhibit high social capital with other leaders?
So that's a big question, and we don't have a large enough study to really answer all of that. But I think that John's point, human capital is about both the teachers and the leaders. And my sense in these schools, all of which are succeeding with high poverty, high minority student populations, some of these schools were in the bottom of the distribution, those principals were skilled in many ways at figuring out how to draw on the talents of people, how to put people together. And I think that's a really big puzzle because we're appointing people to be principals in some states who haven't taught or taught very little or are constantly feeling the pressure of accountability and not in a meaningful way, but filling out papers and ordering toilet paper. I mean, all of that. What's most remarkable to me, one thing that is most remarkable in these schools is that the schools that had resources dedicated them to hiring a dean of discipline, someone for recruitment and hiring, someone else to manage the building, and the principals, all of whom knew a lot about instruction, concentrated on that piece of the work. So it's what the principals do, but it's also about how their work is structured and what they can do, even if they're extraordinary.
Thank you.
Thanks, Susan. We're going to take some more.
Yeah, we want to hear more from you. I'm going to take you and then come there in the middle, okay?
So in listening to this conversation, I'm struck by an article we used a year ago to open school, written by Atula Gwande on the good to great with teachers. And he studied a number of cystic fibrosis clinics across the country and found that from the less able to the most, there was a 13-year life expectancy difference for patients. I know, I think that's very provocative. And it's not about accountability in a state standard sense, it's about a moral accountability to a quality of life. And I think what he discovered is that all people in each clinic were credentialed, they had passed their state boards, they were impeccable in terms of cleanliness, they passed all their requirements, but there was something about the culture in the clinics between the 13 years and not 13 years of survival rate. So I think that argues a bit perhaps for social.
Wonderful, wonderful example. The next one here.
I'm just wondering, at what point does this become decisional capital? Because you're talking about experienced leaders who make wise decisions and whose judgment is then so that our social capital is not necessarily mandated or coerced, which makes a huge difference in how effective social capital is. So no one really touched on decisional capital in any depth. So I was wondering, at what point do we talk about decisional capital with, some of the other issues we've been discussing?
Thank you. One more from here. Anybody? Yes.
So I couldn't help but be inspired by the presentation by the U.S. Secretary of Education as he was talking about the power of putting teachers in rooms together, networking, building together. And I think I'm hoping that it kind of reflects almost a maturation of his leadership in a sense. But I couldn't help but think what our life would be like right now had he taken that approach from his first year in office rather than towards the end. And I put that in the context of looking at it through the social capital context, or through that lens, because I really didn't process what he was talking about until I heard this kind of framework and realized that anyone who works in a school and works with children know that the social capital is everything. It's the energy, it's the life, it's that feeling of self-efficacy that you can actually impact the learning of a child. So thank you for the opportunity.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Andy, take us forward.
Yeah, Tom, I wonder if, not Tom, John, you know where this is going. I wonder if you could respond to particularly these issues about, yeah, Susan knows exactly where it's going. If you could respond to these issues about experience and judgment over time, because not amongst economists currently you're probably in the minority, and why is that? And what do you have to say?
I can't speak for others, but I can speak for me. I mean, I think that this in some ways this is a story about getting better evidence, and at least this is my view, that with the best evidence we had 10 years ago seemed to show this plateau. And I think that what we do in our paper is say that there's some assumptions that were built into that led you to sort of find that result. And so if we relax those assumptions, and now we have better data, we have more teachers, we can track teachers over a longer period of time, we're finding different patterns. And so I think that I'm hoping that this will lead us to reconsider that what was seen as being a fact, that teachers stopped improving. And I think that if we sort of listen to what's going on out there in schools, that we as researchers, that's imperative upon us to do and understand. Just because the data says something, or we think it says something, maybe there are assumptions baked into what we're doing that don't actually reflect the reality. And so what I hope is that our study, at least questions these things and lets other people dig into them more. And on this decisional capital piece, I think that, I have a hard time separating that from these other two pieces in some ways.
So do they, obviously, yeah.
So I mean, I see this as sort of building human capital over time, and maybe you would call that decisional capital. But I do think that
building these skills of teachers and is really important, and that we're seeing this happening over time, and we're seeing it happening more in schools that focus on these things around social capital. And so I really just think that these are all so intertwined that it's very hard to separate these out. And I think that the interactions between them is really where we're going to have sort of the biggest bang for our buck in terms of thinking about these things and looking at them. If we can, at a given point in time, if we can improve the social capital and that improves student outcomes, that's all well and good. It'd be better if that could actually build the capacity of the school and build the skills of those teachers so that we'll have this investment and payoff down the road.
Great, thank you. Either Carrie or Susan, anything to add?
I just want to say that a very important part of the last 15 years of school reform has been driven by what researchers were doing and able to do, and that the emergence of value-add measures, student achievement measures, and then the consequent policies that said we will identify who's strong and who's weak, and you'll go and you'll stay and, or you'll get money or whatever, have actually had a lot of accelerated effect because we knew what to look for. We could say, this is how we'll measure it. And I think in the questions of how do you measure social capital, and you hear Carrie talking about strong ties and weak ties and social networks, and John talking about the surveys, the TELS surveys that assess, where teachers assess their learning environments, they're much mushier and more complex. And I think this is a real challenge for researchers to figure out how to develop measures that actually reflect the complexity of what's going on, because, policymakers want to know an answer, and to have a measurable answer is far superior to having something that's more complex.
So a lot about measurement and methodology and the development of research. And of course, we all have a paradoxical relationship. We say too much testing, too much concentration on value added, and then we say, of course, all our schools are 6 highest performing schools according, in the top performing category according to blah, blah, blah. And we all end up doing that, and then we bang ourselves across the head and keep going anyway. But could I just ask the question, is there anybody, because this conference, there are people from many places in the room, is there anybody from outside the United States who currently works outside the United States? Which country?
Canada, Ontario.
Okay, so some people think that's the 51st state, actually. But yeah, so in a second, could I ask both you and Pasi the same question here, which is looking at experience in other systems elsewhere. If America were a school, is it an example of one of those schools that sort of reached the limit with what it can be, given who it's got and how much actual capital it's investing? Is it what some economists were saying is, America's like a school that after 4 years has got as far as it can go, and now can't get any further unless we do something wildly different in how we develop things? And would the answer to that question be different in different countries? So I wonder if the two of you could respond to this.
So, because I'm not really familiar with the situation in the States, except what I read and have discussions with people about, I can't really answer that. I don't know. I mean, I assume the answer is no, that there's actually lots of room for improvement. And that's what attracted me to this session, was the word improvement in your title. So, so I would say I'm confident that there's lots of room for improvement in the U.S.
Pasi, how would you answer that?
Yeah, just a comment. The panel was speaking about the evidence, how much more we have research and data and ideas what works. I'm curious to expand this outside of the United States. All your studies and research is done here, but American research data and knowledge is extensively used around the world. And now we have much more international evidence through large-scale assessments like the OECD PISA, for example. And it doesn't really answer any of these questions that we have had here. But there's something interesting there. For example, the OECD is now, based on the PISA study, is concluding that competition between schools, that when schools are competing against one another, and when teachers are competing within the schools against other teachers over enrollment, that this is not related to enhanced systems performance, which indicates that it's a trust and collaboration and networking rather than competition. But let me throw this back to you, Andy. We are running out of time.
We are.
But if you can make a comment also from the international perspective on the human social decisional capital issue. And then I would like to give just a final word to each of you, just one sentence to wrap this up so that we can close the thing. But what have you seen?
It's a very short answer, and it's not an answer, it's another question. But it's that just as if we were a school, we have a lot to learn. We know the answer is often in the room within our own school, but we have a lot to learn from other schools. And so I'd throw it back as a question and say, well, let's just ask it as a question, which is, within this huge country, are there some things where we'll get a better learning curve by a steeper learning curve by looking at and learning from and collecting data on these questions from other countries? OECD does this a little bit with its TALIS studies, for example. And so it's to throw it back with a question and to say, perhaps we should start collecting some data sets that don't make one country the kind of universal standard of what is possible.
Okay.
Okay?
Okay. Anybody? Carrie, last sentence.
Last sentence would be social capital works.
Okay, John. Human capital works.
I think human capital works. Yeah, but I think it's also about how it's deployed and how it's managed. And social capital for social capital's sake isn't good, but social capital, well, if deployed well and used well, I think it can be really powerful, and it can help build human capital.
Thank you, Susan.
Yeah, I'm on the human capital, social capital interdependence side, but I think we have to really understand how this works within schools and within districts, because without that, we can publish our papers and, you know, it's inconsequential. It just seems to me what we do with it is really, really important, and what it means and how complicated it is. Embracing the complexity rather than reducing it to one sentence, which I haven't.
Right. Well, this has been a capital idea with a capital panel and a capital group from all across the conference.
In the capital of the United States.
In the capital. Very good. Yeah, excellent.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody.